In this video, we're going to be going over example 3.2 in our textbook. This is the section on normal distributions, talking about the Iowa test scores. So they give us some basic information telling us the distribution of Iowa test of basic skills vocabulary scores for 7th grade students in Gary, Indiana is close to normal. So this tells us that we can use all of our rules about normal distributions. So then they give us the details of the distribution, and that is that it is normal with a mean of 6.84 and a standard deviation of 1.55. So the first thing that we're going to do, it always helps to start by drawing the normal density curve for the population, so that you can see the distribution and apply some of the rules that we know to that. So we always start by marking along the bottom. We're going to have our center point plus 3 on either side, so 7 evenly distributed marks. And the first one that we mark is our mean, which in this case is 6.84 in the center of the axis. Then we're going to mark 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations on either side of the mean by adding and subtracting the standard deviation from the mean. So for example, to get 1 standard deviation above the mean, we're going to take the mean of 6.84, add 1.55, and that gives us 8.39 is the 0.1 standard deviation above the mean. Similarly, we're going to subtract 1.55 from the mean to get 5.29 as 1 standard deviation below. So we're going to do that for each of 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations above and below the mean, and mark our axis as you can see here below. Now the next step is going to be to draw the curve over the axis. And the way that we're going to do that is by remembering that the peak is going to be over the mean, and it's concave down from 1 standard deviation below to 1 standard deviation above. So if we go to 1 standard deviation below here and start, we would draw up and then back down until we get to 1 standard deviation above the mean. And then from that point, the concavity switches to concave up in both directions. So outside of that 1 standard deviation of the mean, it's concave up. So now this is giving us the general graph of our distribution, and we'll be able to apply this information to answer certain questions about the distribution. So for example, what if we wanted to know what percent of the vocabulary scores are less than 3.74? Well, since we know that this is a normal distribution, we can apply the 68, 95, 99.7 rule and try to determine how many standard deviations away from the mean is 3.74, and then use some subtraction to pull the pieces together to figure out what percent of values falls below 3.74. Remember that 68, 95, 99.7 rule is all about percentages of distribution. So again, here is our distribution. So what we're going to do is first we locate 3.74, and we can see that 3.74 is 2 standard deviations below the mean. Here's the mean at 6.84. 5.29 is 1 standard deviation below, 3.74 is 2 standard deviations below. And we are looking for vocabulary scores less than 3.74. So we're looking for what is the percentage of this little tail down below the 3.74. So to do that, we're going to use this information about the percentages that fall within common standard deviations of the mean and the 68, 95, 99.7 rule. So we're going to start off by looking and saying, well, okay, 3.74 is 2 standard deviations below the mean. So one piece of information we know is that within 2 standard deviations of the mean, 2 below and 2 above, is 95% of all of our data. And because we know that, we can subtract to say, well then that means that outside of 2 standard deviations of the mean, everything that's left is going to be 5% of our data. So if we have 95% between these 2 points here, then between the left-hand tail and the right-hand tail is going to be a combination of 5% left. Remember, everything under the distribution curve totals 100%. All of the scores together are 100%. So if we know that those two tails total 5% together, and we know that the distribution is symmetrical, that's part of the definition of normal, then we know that each of those two tails is 2.5% of the data. And then that now gives us the information, since we're only looking at this left-hand tail, the data that's below 3.74, we now know that 2.5% of scores fall below 3.74. So again, it's about sketching the normal curve, locating the value that the question is asking about, identifying in what direction it's talking. Is it talking about what percent falls below, what percent falls above, what percent falls between that and another value? Graphically note that on your sheet, and then start using the information that we know about the distribution, the 68, 95, 99.7 rule, and subtract or build together what the percentage that we're actually looking for would be.